What if your peaceful escape, the kind of place you build to get away from the noise of the world, suddenly turned into a battlefield because a power-hungry HOA decided your land belonged to them? Imagine fake badges flashing at your gate, forged papers waved in your face, and even your own neighbors turning against you. It sounds absurd, right? But the intimidation only got darker, the lies bigger, and the fight far more dangerous than anyone could have expected. And when the pushback finally came, it wasn't the kind of retaliation the HOA saw coming. It started simple. I wasn't looking for drama, and I sure wasn't out to fight anyone. My whole reason for buying land out here was to escape all that. No HOA board meetings, no bickering over mailbox colors or grass height, no neighbors peeking over the fence to measure whether my shed was regulation size. Instead, I wanted quiet. I wanted to wake up to the smell of pine and hear the wind pushing through the trees. The cabin I built wasn't fancy, but it was mine, my space, my freedom. Out here, nobody cared if my truck sat in the drive a little dusty or if I wanted to hang Christmas lights in July. For a while, it was perfect. Friends would come by on weekends, we'd grill out, maybe ride dirt bikes through the back trails, and laugh about how ridiculous life in an HOA neighborhood used to be. This place was my escape, my sanctuary from all the petty nonsense. But then came Karen. She wasn't just a concerned neighbor. She was the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA a few miles down the road, a neighborhood I didn't even live in, nor had any obligation to. The first letter she left on my gate made me laugh. Typed on HOA letterhead, full of bolded phrases like violation of community standards and failure to comply may result in fines. I crumpled it up, tossed it in the burn barrel, and went back to splitting firewood. Then another one came. This one accused me of unauthorized construction because of a small shed I had built near the tree line. She claimed it wasn't aesthetically aligned with community expectations. I didn't even live in her community. At first, I ignored it. People like Karen thrive on attention, and I figured if I didn't feed the fire, she'd run out of fuel. But she escalated. Soon, she wasn't just sending letters. She was parking her SUV just outside my property line, glaring at me while scribbling on her clipboard. Sometimes she'd snap photos as if she was documenting crimes for some future trial, and the tone shifted. The notes got nastier. Accusations of public nuisance, claims that my property was bringing down neighborhood values, thinly veiled threats about what would happen if I didn't cooperate. It was laughable, but also infuriating. I came out here to avoid exactly this kind of control. And here she was, dragging it to my front door. Then one Saturday, it got ridiculous. I heard tires crunching on the gravel drive and stepped outside to find two men in black polos and cargo pants standing at my gate. They wore badges that looked like they were printed off the internet and clipped onto their belts, the kind of thing you'd expect at a Halloween store. Karen was with them, naturally. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her nose, lips pursed like she was the sheriff of some old western town. "These men are with HOA security," she declared, like she was introducing federal agents. "You're in violation of multiple bylaws. They're here to enforce compliance." I couldn't help but laugh. HOA security? What was next? A neighborhood Navy SEAL team? One of the guys actually puffed out his chest, like he expected me to be intimidated. But inside, my jaw tightened. This wasn't just annoying anymore. This was trespassing, harassment, intimidation. I could see the smug look on her face, the way she believed she could bulldoze me into submission. And I'll admit, a part of me wanted to snap right then and there. Instead, I played it calm. "You boys lost?" I asked, leaning against the post. "Because you're standing on private land, which means you're trespassing." Karen jumped in before they could respond. "This is common property, subject to HOA oversight." "Funny," I said, "because the deed in my safe says otherwise." That's when I heard boots crunching behind me. My cousins had driven up earlier that morning. Two of them former military, the kind of men you don't argue with when they say, "Move." They stepped forward, broad-shouldered and quiet. And suddenly Karen's security team didn't look so tough. The bigger of the two fake guards shifted nervously. The other glanced at Karen, waiting for direction. She barked something about standing firm, but her voice cracked halfway through. It was a standoff, but the power was tilting, and Karen could feel it. That night, I figured she'd finally back off. I was wrong. The next morning, I woke up to find pickup trucks parked across my driveway, blocking the exit. Not just Karen's SUV anymore. She'd roped in a few of her loyal followers. They were treating my land like a hostage situation. She was pacing out front, shouting into her phone. I overheard bits of it. Violations, unauthorized activity, danger to the neighborhood. And then the kicker. She had called the sheriff. When the deputy finally showed up, Karen practically ran to him, waving her clipboard. "You need to remove him. He's refusing HOA compliance." The deputy turned to me and I braced myself. Would he take her side? Would he fall for her stack of fake rules and bogus authority? Instead, he shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, this isn't HOA land. It's his property. You don't have jurisdiction here." For the first time, Karen faltered. Just for a second. But then she doubled down, ranting louder, accusing me of all kinds of nonsense. You could see the neighbors shifting uncomfortably. Some of them were starting to realize maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the battle Karen thought it was. And right then, in the tense silence after her latest rant, a faint sound rolled through the trees. A low, steady rumble. At first, it was barely noticeable, but then it grew louder, deeper, until everyone turned their heads toward the road. The roar of Harley engines. The roar of the Harleys grew louder until the gravel road in front of my cabin shook with the weight of half a dozen bikes pulling in. These weren't kids playing weekend biker. These were men I knew, men who had served, men who had carried real authority in places far more dangerous than a quiet stretch of county road. And when they stepped off those bikes, leather vests creaking, the entire tone of the standoff shifted in an instant. Karen's so-called HOA security looked like balloons with the air let out. Their puffed chests deflated, hands twitching nervously at their sides. One of them actually stepped back without realizing it. The sound of the engines fading left only heavy silence, the kind that wraps around you and forces everyone to reckon with what's in front of them. Karen, of course, wasn't about to back down. Her voice rose an octave as she clutched her clipboard like it was the Constitution itself. "This property is subject to HOA authority. He is in violation and must comply immediately." No one moved. The veterans just stood there, calm, arms crossed, not even acknowledging her little performance. You could almost feel the intimidation draining from her side and sliding right into the dirt under her feet. Her security squad was done. Whatever bravado they had evaporated. They looked from Karen to the veterans, then back to me, waiting for someone to call an end to this circus. And that's when headlights appeared. Not another neighbor, not more HOA muscle. This time it was the sheriff's cruiser. A collective shift rippled through the crowd. This was the moment. The line between Karen's fantasy world of fake authority and the real one that actually carried consequences. The sheriff stepped out, a no-nonsense kind of guy named Morrison. He didn't waste time. His eyes swept over the scene. The motorcycles, the clipboard queen, the trucks blocking my driveway, and the two wannabe security guards with badges that wouldn't fool a kindergartner. "What's going on here?" he asked flatly. Karen pounced on the opening, voice shrill with desperation. "Sheriff, thank goodness. This man refuses to comply with HOA regulations. He's building unauthorized structures, endangering the community, violating countless bylaws." Morrison held up his hand. "Ma'am, this land isn't part of your HOA, you know that. I told you that last time." Her face twisted, but she pushed harder. "We have documentation, contracts, evidence of violations." She waved a stack of papers like they were holy scripture. Morrison took them, flipped through a few pages, and sighed. "These are forgeries. Half these seals don't even match county records. And this," he tapped one of the fake badges clipped to her security team, "is a federal crime. Impersonating law enforcement isn't a joke." The two men in polos visibly paled. One stammered, trying to defend himself, but the sheriff wasn't listening anymore. He was calling it for what it was: fraud, forgery, harassment. The neighbors had gathered by then, pulled in by the noise, the bikes, and the flashing lights. They stood clustered at the edge of the drive, watching Karen unravel in real time. Some of them had been her biggest supporters, parroting her claims, whispering behind my back about being a problem neighbor. But as Morrison laid out the truth, the fake authority, the bogus fines, the impersonation charges, you could see the recognition dawn on their faces. They'd been duped, manipulated, used as pawns in Karen's game of control. And Karen knew it. That's why she started talking faster, her lies tumbling out over one another. She contradicted herself, claiming first that the documents came from county offices, then from state authorities, then admitting she had connections who drafted them. Each excuse only dug the hole deeper. Her loyalists shrank back. One woman actually muttered, "I didn't know," before slipping into the crowd, unwilling to be tied to the sinking ship. Morrison didn't let it drag on. He radioed for backup, flagged down a state official, and started collecting statements. And when the second cruiser rolled up, Karen's last sliver of control evaporated. Forgery, impersonation, harassment, property fraud. Morrison listed them like items on a grocery run. These aren't HOA violations, ma'am. These are crimes. Serious ones. The veteran stood silent behind me, arms folded, like a wall no one wanted to test. My cousin smirked but said nothing. They didn't need to. The show was over and everyone knew it. Neighbors who had once nodded along with Karen now looked at me differently. Some walked over quietly, muttering apologies. A man I'd barely spoken to before shook my hand, his eyes heavy with guilt. We didn't realize how far she'd taken it. Should have known. By the time the sun dipped behind the tree line, Karen was no longer strutting. She was cornered, her once iron grip slipping through her fingers. The clipboard hung uselessly at her side, papers fluttering in the dirt. When Morrison finally read her the words she thought she'd never hear. "You're under investigation," she snapped. She shouted about conspiracies, about the county being corrupt, about me bribing officials. But nobody bought it anymore. Her spell was broken. The fallout came fast. Investigations opened into the HOA's finances. Lawsuits piled up from neighbors who realized they'd been fined under fraudulent pretenses. The 2 fake security guards were booked for impersonation. And Karen, once smug, untouchable, and feared, became the face of disgrace. The HOA crumbled under the weight of its own lies. Board members resigned. Families stopped paying dues, citing fraud. The structure that Karen had ruled like a queen's court dissolved into chaos. And me? For the first time in weeks, I breathed easy. My land was quiet again. The motorcycles roared off one by one, leaving only tire marks and a lingering reminder that real strength doesn't need clipboards or fake badges. The neighbors, once cold, became warm. Invitations to cookouts appeared. Apologies turned into conversations. One even said, "You stood up when none of us had the guts to." Thank you. But as the dust settled, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper with 5 words scrawled across it. "This isn't over. Watch closely." I folded it, tucked it into my pocket, and stared out at the tree line. Maybe it was Karen. Maybe one of her allies. Maybe it was just a bluff. Either way, it didn't matter. I knew now that sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought overseas or in a courtroom. They're fought right here on your own land, against people who think control is theirs by default. And standing tall, no matter the cost, is the only way to win. So I'll ask you the same question I asked myself in that moment. If this happened on your land, what would you do?